We are good.
Today, I'd like to start off with an I am statement that as soon as I read it, I just saw that it was just an incredible, powerful statement. And thank you, Michael, for writing out this statement today. So I am the realization of my ancestors' wildest, most healed dreams. I'm just going to say that again. I am the realization of my ancestors' wildest, most healed dreams. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We, over the past episodes that we have been talking through over the course of this year, we have focused primarily on trauma healing. And it is so important to heal trauma. And then we have this whole other side of the spectrum, and that's to acknowledge that our ancestors were incredibly talented, incredibly gifted, incredibly resilient individuals. And today's episode is all about digging for those stories. Your presence is from a long line of people who were survivors and scientists and artists and highly creative people who found ways to navigate very, very difficult situations. So, I think a lot of times when we come to genealogy work in the first place, there may have been a death or a loss in the family or some tragedy that was uncovered. And underneath the tragedy, there is a lot of strength and grit and resilience. And so that is what we're going to dive into today. And we're going to kick it off with Michael, Ancestral Strength Mining. So the genealogy as a map to resilience. Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Ruschelle. So very often when we come to ancestral healing work, generally it's because trauma has shown up in our lives. And then we start to associate, as Ruschelle said, we start to associate ancestral healing work with the trauma. And then we start to realize whether it's because we read a book or one of these podcasts, or we've just kind of stumbled on what our family went through, and we say, well, actually, there's some pretty good stuff here going on. There's some resilience going on here. And what we're talking about today is actually saying that it's not, there's this big pile of trauma and there's this kind of little bit of resilience over here, which is kind of nice, and there's a little bit of compensation. What we actually want to say is that these two are mechanically related. And the only reason your ancestors' trauma reached you is because they survived through whatever that was. So there's a mechanical relationship, a reciprocal relationship, a 50-50 relationship. So ancestral strength mining is a deliberate, structured practice of going and looking at that side of what our ancestors suffered, what they endured, what they created and built, and all of those positive qualities that comes down to us. And then that links into that I am statement that Ruschelle made before about, because we're actually not just here to heal ourselves, we are here to heal our whole genetic line. And that's what Neville Goddard implies when he says you have to go back to the beginning of where this happened. And most of what we're dealing with here did not begin in our own lives. So family history research focuses on the vital records, births and deaths and marriages, all of those, but the real stories are the emotional stories, and the occupation that somebody maintained through hardship, the migration into a new culture while holding on to the culture that we left behind, families rebuilt after devastating loss. I've just been working through an experience, a devastating loss that my family went through in 1925. And the way that impacted the family and shattered it, and pulling that back together a century later. And all of this is part of the ancestral strength mining. So trauma-informed genealogy leads us to look at the records in a different light. And from that, it reveals the capacity to continue, and eventually, when it comes to us, not just to continue, but to heal. And so when we're doing ancestral healing, we are healing the things that our ancestors were not able to heal. They were just able to keep going and get forward so that we were able to come. And there's a saying that we are the ones that we have been waiting for. And this is completely applicable in the field of ancestral healing. We are the ones in our family who are able to take what happened in the past, the positive and the negative, and restore it into one grand, brilliant story that allows us to move onto a higher trajectory. And the same epigenetic mechanisms that transmitted trauma, transmitted resilience. And Rachel Yehuda's research on Holocaust survivors has demonstrated that. We didn't just inherit the wound, we inherited the constitution that survived it. And Neville Goddard taught that we do this through assumption, and that's about going into the feeling of being in a higher state. And to do that, we must go in and heal all of those experiences that have happened, and we do that through having understood them, through having mined the strengths, and to bringing all of this together. This is where the two halves of the ancestral work come together, the trauma coming down and also the positive qualities coming down. And so now we're going to come into the next section, and we're going to look at what we call 3 mining lenses, which are 3 specific ways of mining our ancestral strata.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So just as last week we had these 3 diagnostic lenses that we looked through, this week we're going to be looking at 3 different lenses while we look for the positive aspects that were passed down from us. So Bernadette is actually going to kick that off, looking at how do we even look at the record in this kind of from a strengths perspective and a resilience perspective. Bernadette?
I'm ready for that. So lens 1 is, what did they come through? So every family line carries at least one story of survival that should not have been possible. So it's a stretch of time when everything could have ended and it did not. And those moments tell you what your people were made of. So somewhere back there, someone came through war, famine, or epidemics where entire communities were wiped out. And these are some of the things that we're looking for in the records. We're looking for a migration, the choice to step on that boat, to leave everything familiar and to start over somewhere strange. Economic collapse, but we can see that things were rebuilt and the family survived. Personal loss that should have broken the line and it did not. A death, or someone was incarcerated or simply left the family. And then the ancestors who simply outlasted the hardships that took everyone around them. And that's one of the most remarkable things when you see everybody close by that didn't make it, and your ancestors, they did. So there's a practice of what we want you to do as you are looking through these records, to look for one ancestor, not try and do the whole tree, because the whole tree can be overwhelming, but look at one person and then look at the world they were standing in. And not only the dates and the records, but to think of them as a person and what was around them while they were living. So just think about that. Like the man who raised 6 children through the First World War and then the flu that followed that. A woman who crossed the ocean alone at 19, and a family that built again on the same ground after it was taken from them twice. You know, in my family, my great-grandfather lost his 3rd wife, all of his wives died from illness, and he was left with 5 little children. So yet I didn't know that story until I began to look at the records. So then ask the real questions. What did it take to come through that? And it's not luck. Luck is not a quality. And the ones who did survive were standing in the same circumstances as the ones who did not. So it was something that was inside them. It was stubbornness, or just the capacity for hope. You know, they weren't going to stop. I'm just going to keep going. Whatever it was, the records we're looking at are pointing at that. They're showing us the story behind the stubbornness. They're showing us how they came through. And that quality did not die with them. It came down the line to you. And you are not hoping you have it. You already have it. So the only thing that's left is for you to begin to recognize that you are still sitting in it. It's unused. You have this resilience, you have this quality in you, and you may not have realized that that was there waiting for you. So as we're going through this whole process, I want you to keep in the back of your mind, what is the most remarkable thing that you know about that anyone in your family survived? And what does it tell you about what you already know about you? Which means you are already carrying this survival, this resilience. But I want you to begin to think about this as we talk further. And I think next up is Michael.
Yeah, Michael is going to talk about the building record, and I'm very interested to hear about this. So, what they made, what your ancestors made. Tell us more.
So this is the second lens that we're looking to, which is it's called the building record. And the question here is, what did they make? So, alongside survival, most family lines contain evidence of some kind of building up, and this could be physical or it could just be emotional. So this is. People didn't just endure, but they built something. They built a home, a business, a community, a body of knowledge, a way of living. And these acts of creation are the flip side of the trauma and whatever it was that they had to survive. So with this lens, we're looking for trades, crafts, or skills sustained across generations. Both my father and my grandfather were engineers. We're looking at the hands that built and grew or made or healed things. We're looking for leadership, whether that's within a family or within a community, and the ancestor who organized, represented, or taught, or held a group together. We're looking for people who held on to spiritual or cultural practices and maintained them through persecution, displacement, or any other kind of pressure. People holding on to religious practice, people holding on to, say, immigrants holding on to the culture, their original culture, and bringing that into a place where they're being oppressed as immigrants. We're looking for businesses started from nothing, risks taken, things created that didn't exist before. Every family has got these, and this is all part of the ancestral strength mining. And also, as well as all of these kind of masculine things that were built, there is a more feminine building, what we might call the care economy, where families were maintained through periods when everything else was collapsing. Women who held families and communities together when men were off at war or perhaps had even failed and left the family. And in my family, I can see both men and women who had reached a point where they couldn't go any further and left the family, and yet others carried on. So this lens here is about looking for examples of this. When I was growing up, there was no record of my grandfather and my grandmother because the marriage had fallen over and my grandmother had had an affair and been kicked out of the family. And yet when I started doing the research into my grandfather, I found that he built his own aircraft in 1909. That's just 6 years after the Wright brothers first flew. He was the first airline pilot in Britain in 1914. And from what I can find, only the second instance in the world where somebody flew a scheduled airline flight. And he was the pilot on that flight. On the first day of World War I, he volunteered as a pilot. He flew in combat for a couple of years, and he survived the war as a lieutenant colonel, quite a senior rank, and twice decorated for bravery. And so there was a huge building up that went on there, and yet all of that had been hidden. And this is why we come in with the building record lens, because it allows us to find these people. So just as in the first lens, think about one of your ancestors. Think about what may have been built up there. What skills did your grandparents have that are no longer in use? What did they make or build? What knowledge did they hold that's perhaps not even formally recognized. So that's the question that to finish this lens is, what did your ancestors make or build, and what creative capacity in yourself does that point to, which you may not yet be fully claiming? With that, I'm going to hand over to Ruschelle for the third lens.
I am taking notes ferociously, Michael, because, I think exploring your family's creativity is an incredible way to stay connected to your lineage, whether that's through building or food or traditions. There are so many cool ways that we can stay connected. And my lens is actually quite similar to yours as well. It's one of the most difficult to pinpoint, and it's when someone in the family started to break free from the trauma and started to kind of shift the family. And maybe you listening today, maybe you are that person. So, we really want to acknowledge that a lot of times we come to this work because we are the ones who are seeing a dysfunction in the family and we want to shift it. And acknowledging that, I think the biggest thing is our ancestors may not have had the time or energy to consciously make that shift. But if you've created something amazing in your life, if you've survived something hard in your life, you are already leaning toward breaking patterns of dysfunction. It means you are a well-equipped person to get through those things. And, I think we sometimes underestimate. I was doing a little research, and I'll deviate slightly with a little story. I was doing some research last night because my son is 2, but I'm going to be homeschooling him, and I'm already researching homeschooling stuff. So there's that. So I was watching some women talk about homeschooling curriculum, and a lot of people have chosen to go back to curriculum that happened before the educational takeover in the United States by the Rockefellers, and that was before the early 1900s. So a lot of homeschool curriculums are using curriculum pre-1900, i.e. the McGuffey readers, things called Ray's arithmetic. There's all of these curriculums that have been developed. And what I found fascinating was that we grew up learning that, hey, grandma only had an 8th grade education, or grandpa only went to school until the 4th grade, when really it is quite possible that grandpa's 8th grade education is far superior to your 12th grade education. And I think that's what we're learning now, is the capacity and the capability of people was much more focused and honed in if they had a chance to receive an education. So that story alone is an example of resilience that is hidden in our ancestors' stories. Oh, poor grandpa, he didn't go to school except till 8th grade. Well, honey, grandpa could do arithmetic circles around you. And grandpa also knew how to raise a garden and build a barn. So, I think there's a lot of underestimating, and sometimes we glorify the future and we underestimate what amazing things people have done in the past. So my section is really all about directing you to look at where healthy patterns have already been established in your family's ecosystem. And maybe that came from a breakaway. Did someone leave the family to go off and kind of get away from negative patterns, and maybe they came back to the family as well? Or did they choose to learn something different that wasn't traditionally in the family? Did they choose a different profession that was maybe less physically demanding? So when you're looking in the record, look for pattern breakers, not just from trauma eruptions, but from wanting to up level. And I think the whole immigrant experience in the United States is one of those. It was both, right? It was horribly traumatic to leave your family and the land that you grew up in, but it was also an act of hey, I want more. Somebody's telling me there's more over there and a better life over there, and I'm going to go get it, and it's worth it. So, who in your family line began to turn toward healing? And what does their courage make possible in you? And I would be interested, Michael and Bernadette, any thoughts when you're looking in the record? Because I know these can be a little bit more hidden, these patterns of healing. They're not as obvious as ruptures sometimes.
I have a great, and I've talked about her before, but my great aunt Nan, she, the healing that I saw that she was bringing to the family, her father passed away when she was 10 and her youngest sister was barely 1, and there were 5 girls. And I found them in the 1915 census, and she had all those girls together in an apartment, all working, she kept the family together. Her strength in making sure that they all stayed together was remarkable, and came through when I finally found that story. It came through the pages like I could just feel it, and it helped me in that time. So I really give her that mantle of the first one to begin the healing, because she was the one that recognized the disaster of what was going on in the family, because she was 10 at the time. She had an awareness. So she was the one that was like, okay, I got to do this. And so I feel that she's that one.
That's a great example for that.
Yeah, with me, I can see that my mother knew something was up. It wasn't visible. It's only since I've been doing the research work and gone into it in some depth and really started doing she started some genealogy work in the 1990s. I never knew anything about it, but I can see that she was taking the first steps there. And it wasn't until I came along sort of 10, 15 years later, after she'd passed away, and started picking up the documents that she'd written and the photographs that she had, that I could see that she was actually starting to say, hey, there's something here that needs looking at. And it's very, again, this is very much trauma-informed genealogy. It's not obvious. It's you could see that she was starting to reach for the holes in the family tree, the gaps, but she just didn't know how to fill them in. But she was definitely looking at them.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for those examples. Those are really great examples. And I know Bernadette has a meditation for us today based around this. So, Bernadette, I will let you
All right.
take us into the meditation.
So we are calling this the assumption practice. And you have done, looking as you go through this process. So you've looked at the names and the stories, and that we've been asking you to recognize the survival that is in your family. So what we want to do here, let me just fix this. My paper just kind of moved a little bit. So, okay. So this is, we're not looking at something abstract. We're stepping into something that was real and documented. And that's what we're going to do as we begin to do this meditation. So the first thing we want to do is to witness what happened. Think about this. So sit quietly and close your eyes. And I want you to begin to think of 3 qualities of things that you found when you were when you were looking for some of the survival that has been passed down. So survival strategies, building strategies, healing. Some of these you may know, some of these you may still need to do some more research, but give each one a name, not a concept, but a single word or short phrase that holds it. So you want to think about the strength of whoever it was that came here, the family that came. You want to think about the men who literally built the house that the family lived in, or the one, as in Ruschelle's case, her grandfather went to work in the mines, in the coal mines, to bring prosperity to the family. Like he was, all of those were resilience and strength. So hold these in front of you, not as facts about people who are gone, but as living qualities in a line that produced you. So now I want you to say to yourself, quietly, without pushing, these qualities did not end with them. They were passed down to me. I inherited them. They are in me. What your ancestors lived is carried in the body. So bring your attention to the center of your body. The belly, the pelvis, the place where the line continues through you. This is where you are joined to everyone who came before you. Breathe slowly. With each breath, let the qualities you named become something you can feel, not something you think. The strength, the endurance, where is that in your body? The creativity, where does that live? The courage it took to heal, can you find it physically somewhere in you? Do not force any of this, just invite it. Your body has been carrying these qualities every day of your life. But it is now that you are turning to look at what is really there. So we want to fully assume these qualities. So to allow yourself to assume this, give yourself fully to one quality, one thought, one idea. You want to build it in your imagination, the experience you would be having if it were already true. You feel it. You make it vivid enough to touch. You let yourself sink all the way into it and stay there. This can be your resilience. This can be your quality of being able to be creative around problem solving. This is something that you know already belongs to you. So build the scene and don't make this scene from the future. I want you to make the scene as right now. You are already the realization of your ancestors' wildest, most healed dreams. And this is not something that you have to reach for. It's here. It is now. So picture a moment, something that you can see and hear and feel. Let it be specific. A moment where you are simply living that quality, that feeling of what you know has been passed down to you. not performing it, not working towards it, but being it in the way that you already know. And what does that feel like in your body? Maybe it's courage. What is the sound around you? How do you move when you have this in you, this feeling, this thing that's been passed down? How do you speak? How do you hold yourself when you are truly fully this? Now I'm going to give you some time. We're going to sit for 2 minutes to let it really become real. Stay faithful to it and let it become a fact. Maybe it starts small and you create a bigger story around it. We're going to sit with it for a little bit. When you are inside this scene, I want you to say to yourself, I am the realization of my ancestors' wildest, most healed dreams. This is something you are really feeling and believing in your body. And it's recognition of what has already been there. And you can feel it in this moment. And as you are in this state, think back, bring back the one ancestor whose survival, whose healing, or whose creation you named as the one that mattered most. If you don't have a name, speak to the feeling as a person, as someone who carried that. And I want you to share with them, I see what you did. I carry it forward. What you could not finish, I will finish. What you began, I continue. I am the answer to your hope. This is the moment the practice stops from being only about you. It becomes ancestral. Not one person changing, not one person healing, but the entire line beginning to heal. And when you are ready, you may come back to the room.
Thank you so much, Bernadette. So for everyone watching today, we just want to remind you that you're the hope of your ancestors. You know, your life is so, so valuable. And your present moment is so valuable. So Neville said a persistent assumption hardens into fact. And I think proclaiming, I am the realization of my ancestors' wildest, most healed dreams is like such a beautiful assumption to be persistent in. Imagine believing yourself to be the best thing that your ancestors could ever imagine. So as you go through your week, you know, we would encourage you to practice being in your body, just taking a couple of minutes to be more present with your body and being with that feeling that you are your ancestors' wildest dreams. And if you're spending time with genealogy records this week or with family stories, or you're not, or you're just going about your day today, I would imagine that little glimpses of your own brilliance and the brilliance of your ancestors will show up. So with that, we wish you guys a really, really good week, and we will see you again next Tuesday.